And as people are still trickling in here, so we will get ready to start in just a minute. Again, the QR code is on the screen for signing in today. We will be posting that in the chat box just shortly. So just a little few things I want to go over for engaging the audience today. As you just heard and was notified on your screen, the webinar will be recorded. We kindly ask that you mute your microphone, avoid multitasking, eliminate distractions, and please use your video when possible. We do know that people have some internet issues that arise, so we just ask if at all possible you could leave your video on. With that being said, I would like to introduce to you Sloan Thompson, the Director of Training and Education at EndTab.org. Welcome, Sloan.
Hello, everybody. So I'm so happy to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to have this chat. I'm just going to quickly share my screen and then we will go ahead and dive in. Okay, so as Marcia said, my name is Sloan Thompson. I am the Director of Training and Education at EndTab. We are an organization that provides trainings for professionals on how to respond to different types of tech-facilitated violence and how to hopefully prevent those types of violence. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to be giving you a lot of information, but I'm not just going to scare you with all the horrible things that people are doing on the internet. I'm going to give you as many different skills, tips, information about how to respond to these types of violence as possible so that you all can go out and best serve survivors in your community. So a little bit of background about me. I am not a tech expert. I'm not someone from Silicon Valley. That is not the perspective of this training today. I'm one of you. I come from the world of victim services and violence prevention. I worked for the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence as their training and outreach specialist. And I worked at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill as a sexual violence prevention coordinator. And then in both of those roles, I began seeing, as I'm sure a lot of you have, that more and more the way that people are experiencing gender-based violence and sexual violence is through their tech, is through their devices, is online. And I began to realize how important it is that all of us have the skills that we need to support those survivors with these new types of violence. And I crossed paths with Adam Dodge, who is the founder and CEO of EndTab. And basically, I just pestered him for a job for 5 years, said, hire me, hire me. And here we are. So I'm very happy to be here with you all in this new role. My pronouns are she, her. In terms of Q&A and the discussion we're going to have today, I really love for these presentations to be as interactive as possible. So I am going to ask formal questions and put questions up on the screen for you all to answer. And also feel free to jump in at any time with any questions or thoughts or feedback that you have. I'm going to have my eye on the chat the whole time. And so anything you want to say, just drop it in the chat and I will address it. I will say that we've got a lot of information to cover today. We're going to be keeping a fast pace. So I will try to respond to everything that I can. And if there's something I can't get to, I would encourage you all to watch the chat as well, interact with each other. There is so much expertise in this room today, and we can all learn from each other, not just from me. And then just a quick content warning, we are going to be talking a lot about different types of tech-facilitated violence. We are all professionals. We all know why we're here, but I would just encourage you all, if you need to take a step back today, if you find yourself having a reaction that you didn't necessarily expect to have, please do whatever you need to do to care for yourself during this time. So if you need to step away, if you need to check in with me after the training, that's absolutely fine. I'm here to support you all in whatever way I can. So let's talk about digital safety and the reasons why it's so important that we center digital safety in our work. First, it's because of the way that we interact with technology in 2024. Today, technology is required. It's not optional. It's not something that anyone can just step away from. We can't just turn off our social media. We can't just put our phones away. Technology is required to survive and thrive. It's the way we do our work. It's the way we have relationships with our family. It's the way that we date. It's the way that we entertain ourselves. So when our digital lives become dangerous, it our lives become dangerous. All aspects of our lives become dangerous. And so it's incredibly important that we try to safeguard those digital spaces for all of us. And they're places that we can interact in safety and security. And the other reason is because people act differently when they go online. And this is for all sorts of reasons. And we're going to get into what those reasons are later. But we have all of these strategies and all of these methods for preventing and responding to violence in the physical world. And with those types of strategies, we're anticipating specific types of behaviors that people engage in their physical in-person lives. But the digital world is different. People act differently online. And we all know that. We've all been on social media. We've all been in online spaces. And we recognize that there's different types of behaviors that we see. And we're going to talk today about what those behaviors are. And because people act differently online, we need different strategies for safety. So let's talk about what happens when people are behaving differently online. Let's talk about what happens when abuse goes digital. I am not here to make some sort of broad, hard statement about which is worse, in-person violence or online violence. It's not helpful to make a comparison in that way. And what we know is that every survivor of violence is having a very unique experience. Their experience is centered in the conditions of their lives. But there are certain things that we need to note about digital violence and how harmful it can be, because people tend to minimize this type of violence. People tend to dismiss the experiences of survivors of digital violence. And we need to understand these dynamics so that we can best support them and prevent violence. So let's talk about those unique characteristics. One, when violence goes digital, it's easier to commit. The internet, our tech, our devices, it removes barriers between the perpetrators of violence and the people who experience harm. In the physical world, there has to be that physical proximity for violence and sexual violence. But with our tech, people carry around their phones in their pocket. It's a little doorway into someone's life that they have on them 24/7 in places like their home, where they would normally feel safe from violence. Suddenly they are at risk. So it removes barriers. It makes the violence more convenient. So when we think about something like stalking and location tracking, if we stalk someone in person physically, that's a tremendous amount of labor and time. Someone has to be out in the world with their body, following somebody and getting into their space. When we have location tracking through devices, a perpetrator can be stalking someone, harassing them, making them afraid from the privacy and convenience of their own home. It makes the violence more accessible. It can happen in more ways, and that can really escalate things. And then there's this anonymity aspect. For so many types of physical violence, somebody has to be in person, which makes them very easily identifiable. So many types of digital violence are happening behind screens, and it makes the perpetrator anonymous, which can make the victim or the survivor feel so much more afraid because they don't know who is committing the violence. They don't know where it's coming from. And it creates this shield of accountability for the perpetrator. And a lot of times the violence itself is invisible. When we think about image-based abuse, there might be a situation where intimate images, sexually explicit images of a victim survivor might be put online. And those images might be online, damaging their reputation, violating their dignity, undermining their sense of bodily autonomy for weeks or months or years before they even know about it. And because of that, when they do find out about the abuse, the traumatic impact can be so much more amplified, because suddenly they have this feeling of fear that something could be happening to them without them even knowing about it. And those sorts of dynamics in certain situations can lead to the harm being amplified and escalated, because all of that harm that happens online is suddenly repeatable, especially when we think about something like image-based sexual abuse. We can have a situation where intimate images are being shared not only one time, but over and over and over again over a period of months or years. It could be something that the survivor is dealing with for the rest of their lives. And it's incredibly difficult to start healing from trauma when the traumatic incident doesn't end. This type of violence is far-reaching. People all over the world can suddenly witness and participate in the abuse of a survivor. It's very public. The incident itself can be seen by hundreds, thousands, even millions of people, and the victim blaming and shaming, the fallout can also be, suddenly we can have hundreds or thousands of people piling on, creating this mob violence, engaging in victim blaming in a way that makes a survivor's experience incredibly traumatic at a much larger scale. And there's a level of permanence to digital violence. It doesn't necessarily go away. That public humiliation, I don't know why I went on mute, but it can last for the rest of somebody's life. And that adds this layer of perpetual harm. So for all these reasons, it's incredibly important that we take digital safety very seriously, and we never try to minimize the experience of survivors who have experienced their violence online. And so what we want to do is create this holistic framework of safety, where when we talk about someone being safe, we're talking about them being physically safe, emotionally safe, and digitally safe. But what do we mean by that? A lot of times when we say the phrase digitally safe, there's an instinctual kind of understanding of what that might mean, that they can use their phone without being harassed. But let's just dive into that and make sure that we all have a shared understanding and a shared definition of what we mean by digital safety. So there are going to be three components to this definition. One has to do with access. We need to make sure that everybody can access their technology freely. No one is preventing them from using their phone. No one is preventing them from using any of their accounts, their bank accounts, their social media accounts. They need to be able to log on, log off, and control those accounts and devices in exactly the way that they want to. And then there's that aspect of control. Okay, so let's say that they have access to their phone, they can log on to their accounts anytime they want. We also need to make sure that they can use those accounts in the way that they want, without being monitored, without being restricted. And then we have this last component of existence. People need to be able to exist online in exactly the way that they want without limitation or fear. And a really great example of that is gaming. We know that gaming, online gaming, is a place where a tremendous amount of harassment and violence happens, and especially gender-based violence. Female gamers are subject to all sorts of really horrible abuse, harassment, sexual abuse. And one really interesting statistic is that over 70% of female gamers have reported that they intentionally play the games as male characters, or they have done that at some point in order to hide, in order to prevent themselves from being harassed. And so in that case, yes, they're able to play the game whenever they want. And yes, they're able to control the way that they play the game, but they have to adjust their behavior because they cannot exist in that space as who they actually are without being harassed. So if somebody doesn't meet all of these different requirements, if they're not able to meet that access, control, existence trio, then we could say that they're not digitally safe. And so this is the question. This is where we get to, and this may be what some of you are thinking, and this is what we hear all the time when we do these trainings. But what if I'm not tech savvy? I'm not a tech expert. I don't know what to do here. And that's a real and valid anxiety. What happens if somebody's experiencing this abuse and I can't help them? Well, I have some good news for you. We do not have to be experts in order to act when a victim is being harmed online or via technology. We don't. There are all sorts of practical skills that are accessible to all of us that we can use to support survivors and prevent online violence. And also, we can empower victims and survivors to be experts, or and we can empower them by letting them know that they do not need to be experts to keep themselves safe in the digital age. Okay, so let's dive in to that safety. How can we identify different types of online violence? And then how can we work to prevent and respond to that violence? It's really important that we clarify what the risks are here and why there are certain unique types of risks that are unique to an online environment. One is this false sense of security. A lot of times when people are sitting behind their screens, they feel like they're safe. And this is for a couple reasons. One is we have this focus on physical safety. From the time that we are kids, we are taught to protect our bodies. We're taught to look both ways before we cross the street. We're taught that we need to not touch burners with our hands when they're on. And that's all really important stuff. We need to protect our bodies. Our bodily safety is incredibly important. But by only focusing on physical safety, we create this false sense of security that if our body is safe, we are safe. And that means that we don't have our instincts primed in the same way for digital safety. When we don't have those instincts and when we don't teach our kids how to have those instincts, then when they are on social media, when they're using their accounts, when they're using their devices, they're not primed for fear and risk the way that they are when they're in the physical world. And so we have to reframe how we're teaching about safety so that we have our kids developing those instincts for digital spaces that they do for physical spaces. And then we have to think about populations that might be at extreme risk for being harmed by technology. So this is my first question for you all. Let's start dropping answers in the chat. What are some groups of people that might be at an elevated risk for online harm or digital violence? Elders. Okay, yeah, so I got a lot of answers coming in. So Amaya says elders. Yes. Older people are at extreme risk for all sorts of digital harm. When we think about a lot of scams, romance scams, financial scams, we know that people who are elderly, they don't necessarily have the same expertise. They're not told about email scams. They're not told about all the different, phishing scams. And because they're not aware of those types of abuse, they are much more likely to fall prey to them. They don't have the same instincts for what would look suspicious on an email or what it means for a text message to come in from a number that you can't identify. Young people, absolutely. Again, for all the reasons that we've just talked about, that kids don't necessarily have the same instincts for safety in digital spaces. And so when a stranger approaches them in the physical world, they might think, oh no, I'm told not to talk to strangers. But when a stranger approaches them on social media, when a stranger approaches them in a gaming space, they don't necessarily think they're in danger. And so they don't know to protect themselves in the same way. Trans teens, and I'll just expand this to LGBTQ teens and young people. We know that LGBTQ young people are up to 4 times as likely to experience different types of harassment, sexual harassment, identity-based harassment on social media and in other spaces. All right. Yep. So I'm seeing a lot of elders, LGBTQ youth, teens, young people. And I also want to, Tiffany says those with intellectual disabilities. Absolutely. We tend to overlook the fact or minimize the fact that people with intellectual or developmental disabilities are sexual people. They are having romantic relationships. And a lot of times they are living their romantic and sexual lives online. And that puts them at extreme risk for sextortion scams, for romance scams, and for other types of financial scams and abuse because they're not being supported and educated in the same way about why those online interactions might be risky. So those are all excellent questions. And we need to be out there in the communities protecting all of those groups as we protect all survivors. But also, I'm going to add to this list people in abusive relationships. A lot of times, the same way that we really focus, where there might be this myth that stranger danger is the real danger with sexual violence. And what we actually know is that the vast majority of the time, it's acquaintances, it's friends, it's partners, it's known people that are committing sexual and physical violence. When we talk about online violence, it's usually someone who has access to the survivor. A lot of violence stems from a personal connection, and that has to do with the motivation. A lot of times we victimize people, or perpetrators victimize people because they are known and they want to control them. They want to have that power over them. And also that personal connection creates access and opportunity. Most forms of violence online are not incredibly sophisticated attacks. They come from things like one person has another person's password and access to their phone, and they use that to create all sorts of harm. So it's the access and the opportunity that creates the risk. And also trust. Why does this person have the victim's passwords? Why does this person have the survivor's device? It's because of trust. It's because at some point, that victim, that survivor, shared that information. They shared the devices. They left them at home on a counter. So those are the conditions that create the risk. Now, it's very important to note that this is not true for everything, but a lot of times, because these things are happening online, the attacks appear incredibly sophisticated and technical. A survivor might say, my ex-partner knows exactly what I am or where I am. They know exactly what I'm doing, and I have no idea how they're getting that information. And their mind goes to, are they hacking my accounts? Are they in my devices? Have they put stalkerware in my devices? And that's an incredibly terrifying thing to think about. But the vast majority of the time, even though the attacks appear sophisticated, they are not. It's just somebody having that access and opportunity and trust. Sometimes it is sophisticated, though, and that's really important to note. Sometimes somebody does have a tremendous amount of tech expertise, and that's what they're using to target a victim. In that case, and this is the first of many resources I'm going to share with you all today, this is a really helpful organization. So this is Operation Safe Escape. They are cybersecurity professionals who donate their time pro bono in order to support victims of sophisticated types of online abuse. This is really great. So if somebody is experiencing like a stalkerware attack, if they're experiencing hacking, if their devices have been completely taken away from them with some sort of sophisticated abuse that's happening through multiple layers of security and anonymity, all that sort of things, they can reach out to Operation Safe Escape and they can help them find ways to combat that abuse and get their devices and accounts back under their control. And if some of you are on your side of the screen jotting down notes, all of these resources and more are going to be given to you after the training in a resource guide. So you're going to get all of this later on. So Naomi asked, what if it is information and not accounts? So a lot of times when we talk about unauthorized account access and information collecting, those things sort of go hand in hand. It's access in the accounts that's giving the information, or it's location tracking or something like that. But you are correct that a more sophisticated type of violence would be somebody kind of going into back doors for photos, for social media, and collecting different types of data that exist in those spaces. And that would be a more sophisticated type of attack. A lot of times when that information is out there, once the data is retrieved, it's very difficult to get it back. And actually, there's a certain type of scam called a recovery scam where somebody will swoop in and say, hey, I'm an expert hacker or I'm a cybersecurity professional and I can get all your data back. I can get your stolen images back. That's usually a scam. And a lot of times in those scams, they'll ask for payment up front. If you pay me $600, I can get all of your data back. The unfortunate news is that a lot of times once that data is out there, it's out there. And so we're going to talk about ways that at that point, somebody could lock down their accounts and be safer moving forward. But again, that type of sophisticated attack, Operation Safe Escape, is a really great resource for that person to help protect them moving forward. And yes, Safe Escape is a free service. These professionals do this pro bono. You're very welcome. Thank you for the great question. Okay, so we're going to talk about the two most common forms of tech-enabled abusive behaviors. And then towards the end of the training, we're going to talk about image-based sexual abuse. But let's talk first about these two types of behaviors that are most common within the context of an abusive relationship. The first is going to be accessing someone's accounts and devices without consent. And another term for this would be unauthorized account access. It's incredibly important that we use this language: unauthorized account access, accessing accounts and devices without consent. A lot of times, people use the term hacking. Someone hacked into my email, someone hacked into my account. Hacking is what's known as a term of art. It's a specific legal term that refers to a specific crime. And when we talk about hacking, we're talking about those more sophisticated types of digital violence and violation. When it's just somebody having a password or guessing a password and going into an account, this is when we get into unauthorized account access. And when someone is describing what happened to them to the police, to an advocate, to a judge, to a prosecutor, if they describe the crime in this way, then it's perfectly clear what has happened. And there's not going to be any confusion with trying to hold that person accountable. The average person, okay, so here's my question for you. And I know that this is tricky. So these numbers are going to be very different for older people and for younger people. But let's just say the average person in America, how many apps do you think the average person has on their phone? 15, 40, 7, 200, 65, 35. Okay, lots of different numbers here. The average person has 80 different apps and 90 different accounts. Think about all these things that, the other day I was trying to book a flight and I'm like, oh, I can get this flight through Priceline. And suddenly I have a Priceline app on my phone. All those different times where you're out shopping and you make a new account in order to shop, and that account gets your email address and it gets your financial information and it gets your password. Think about that for a second. 80 different apps and 90 different accounts. That's 170 different little doorways into someone's life. And that's 170 different places of vulnerability for someone who's being targeted for abuse. Let's zoom in on one type of account here, and that's a Google account. I use Google. I'm sure that most, if not all of you in the audience, use Google for something. A lot of times it's how we do our work. It's how I do my work. And a lot of times it's how people have their personal email. I want you all to think about when you're on your Google Chrome browser and you've got that menu up in the right corner of the screen of all of the different Google services, all of the different Google apps, calendar, maps, all of that stuff. What type of information could somebody learn about another person if they had access to their Google account? Their location. Absolutely. And they could have their location in a lot of different ways. They could have their location through maps. They could be looking at their different location history and going through in the past and seeing where they've been. They could be reading their emails and they could see any information about the email in their email exchanges about who they're spending time with and where they're going. Barbara says everything. Yeah. So I put everything into my Google Calendar. I put everything I'm doing and everywhere I'm going and exactly who I'm going to be with. My whole life is in my Google account. And if someone had access to it, they would be able to learn a tremendous amount of information about me. Ashley says all of the different types of accounts they hold. Okay, think about when you are creating a new account on a shopping website or on a streaming service or any of those sorts of things. And one of the things that pops up is, how do you want to make this account? Do you want to use Facebook? Do you want to use your email? Or do you want to link it to your Google account? A lot of people will just say, oh, that's easy, my Google account. And then suddenly all of their different accounts are linked, which is incredibly convenient, but it's also a point of vulnerability when we're talking about managing risks. Tia says contacts. Absolutely. So someone's entire network of the people they know and their pictures. Yeah, a lot of images are stored in our Google accounts. Photos, calendars, credit card information, their passwords, their credits, debit cards, absolutely. Their Google Docs. So like their Google Drive, all of their different work documents. So we think about how one person who has one password can suddenly gain all sorts of information about someone they'd like to harass or abuse, and they can cause all sorts of harm. I'm going to scare you, and then I'm going to give you some helpful information. So here's the first part. If you've never done this before, let's walk along. So you can do this on your phone, you can do this on your desktop. Go to myactivity.google.com. So anyone who has any sort of Google account can do this. myactivity.google.com. This is the landing page. This should be what you see when you go to that website. I want to highlight a few things on this page. First is web and app activity. This is a record of everything that someone has done on their Google, through their Google account online. And also location history. So this is everywhere that someone has been. When we look into this, when we check all of these app activity and location history, this is what happens. We get this log of everything that happened in that person's life through their Google account, minute by minute. So, okay, we know that at 2:30, this person opened Google Maps. We know that at 2:36, they were looking around the Portland area. We know that at 2:41, they were looking specifically at Arnold Creek. And we know that at 3:34, they were looking for marketing information. And at 3:41, they went to Fuel to Fly. So it's, imagine somebody who's trying to stalk another individual or somebody who's trying to monitor them. This is their dream. This is a minute by minute window into somebody's life, exactly where they're going to be, what they're going to be doing, who they're going to be with, what are they looking at online. So this is why it's so important that we teach survivors to be on the lookout for this type of abuse, because it can cause so much harm. Here's the good news. There is a way to prevent this. So go to myaccount.google.com, and this is the screen that you will see. Once you're on this page, go to security, which is on the left side. This is the security page. This is what it'll look like. Then scroll down to your devices. This will show every device that's logged into the account. Ideally, it will only be devices that you are familiar with. But let's say that you're walking a survivor through your safety planning with them, and they see a device that is not theirs and should not be in this account. What they can do is click on the devices, take a look. There is some valuable information that can be collected here. So one thing would be each device and the last time it logged into the account and where it's current in whether or not it's currently logged on. If there is a device that someone doesn't recognize, then they can click on don't recognize a device. It'll show all of this. Okay, so this iPhone, it first signed on June 5th, 2019, and the most recent time it signed on was 48 minutes ago. I do not recognize this device, so I am going to kick it out of my account and change the password. But before I do that, one really helpful thing to do would be to take a screenshot of this. This is not a perfect amount of information. It's not going to show exactly who owns the iPhone, but see here where it says locations are approximate based on IP address, more info show the IP address. That's something that can be collected from this page. And as we're putting together a body of evidence for somebody holding a perpetrator accountable, all of this is going to be very helpful. So we're going to screenshot this, kick this device out of the account, and then change the password so that this person can't get back in. All right, so that was unauthorized account access. I'm going to pause here and ask, does anyone have any questions about anything we've talked about so far?
I don't know about any questions, Sloan, but I sure saw a lot of facial expressions when you showed everybody their history.
Yeah. I hope that we're doing a good balance of scaring
Yeah,
people, but also making people feel hopeful that there's something that they can do about this.
yeah.
And I will just pause and say that this same process of go into the account, check for any unknown devices, share a screenshot, save the evidence, and change the password to get this person out of the account, that same process can be done with pretty much any account. Instagram, Facebook, Apple, all of those different accounts have the exact same process. Go in, check who's there, kick them out, change the password. And if there's a specific app that someone wants to use, let's say they want to get someone out of their Netflix account or out of their DoorDash account, they can just Google, how do I see the active devices on my DoorDash account? And they'll get connected to DoorDash's instructions for all of that. All of that information is online. Yeah, so Jessica, yes, my activity. I'm happy to have shared that with you. Okay, and Raylene, most of my stuff is locked down with two-factor authentication and recovery processes. You are anticipating what we're going to get into because yes, that is a really great strategy, and we're going to talk about exactly how to do that. Okay, so let's dive in to our Yes. Okay. And Nikki, that's exactly why we're here today, because a lot of times we use all of these incredibly convenient services and we just aren't aware of how much information those services are tracking about us. And this is why we need to educate people in our community so that if they decide to link all of their accounts, if they decide to have all of this through Google, if they decide to use all of these apps, that's great. That might be the best fit for their life and they can choose to do that. But we want to make sure that they're making an informed choice and they're doing as much as they can to mitigate the risks of those apps and accounts. Now let's change directions and go into stalking and non-consensual tracking. The majority of people who experience stalking in 2024 are experiencing a combination of in-person and digital stalking, or digital stalking is what is the primary means by which they are being stalked. So this is the new frontier of stalking, and this is what we need to be prepared to respond to. I'm going to break this down into what I'm going to call inside threats and outside threats. So inside threats would be the apps and the accounts and the things that already exist on our devices. And then outside threats are going to be like location trackers and external like objects and devices that can be used to track somebody. Someone said, I think hybrid stalking. Yep, absolutely. Okay, so let's think about the apps. I want you all to do this. I want you all to pick up your phone and I want you to open up your home screen and I want you to take a look at all of your apps that are on your phone. And I'm going to ask you, which of these apps could be used to track somebody's location? Life 360. Yes. Okay. So Life 360. This is one of those apps that has a very, very helpful use and also a very, very harmful use. Life 360, same with check-in. These are apps that are meant for parents primarily to be able to keep track of their kids. Where is your kid? Who are they with? What are they doing? How long have they been there? It gives all sorts of helpful information. But someone with access to that app could be using it to monitor the location and the activity of a victim. Or somebody in an abusive relationship could be forced to use an app like Life 360 to be monitored by their abusive partner. It can be a form of coercive control. So that's something that we need to be on the lookout for. Find My Phone. Absolutely. Find My Phone, extremely helpful when you have misplaced your device or when it's been stolen. But in another circumstance, Find My Phone could be a way to track the exact location of someone's device in real time. There's Starbucks app. Yeah, so this is one of those things where it's like I hadn't thought about it, but there will be a history of all Starbucks purchases that someone's made, and that's kind of just a little map of where they've been throughout the day. Facebook, absolutely. So Facebook will have that kind of metadata of tracking where someone is. Also, when it comes to the images that we post or the comments we post, there's an option to do a location tag on that post. And also there's just the information that exists in the background of an image, where somebody was, who they were with. We're offering up that information on our own. Location sharing, Snapchat, yep. So these social media apps, Google Maps, absolutely. And then, yeah, so Jessica says, I think most apps, unless location sharing is off. Yeah, absolutely. Those apps are meant to track us and to give us, for example, ads based on where we are and what we're doing. It's trying to tailor the experience of our digital lives to exactly what's going on in our lives. And for that reason, those apps are constantly tracking us. Now, most apps, there's an option to turn location sharing off. And what Apple has done, I don't know if you've noticed this, but recently what Apple's been doing is every time you download a new app or every time you make a new account, it asks you how it wants your information to be shared. Do you want this app to be tracking your location and your activity all the time? Only when the app is open or never. And that's a choice somebody can make for themselves. And then, yeah, car navigation. Absolutely. So we're going to talk about that as well. So let's zoom in on this. This is a great list. Let's just add to it. Rideshare apps. This is Lyft. This is Uber. When we think about a rideshare app, it shows an entire history of where somebody's been. It can show where they are about to go, and it can show in real time exactly where they're going. A tremendous amount of location data can be used. And also it can show not where someone is, but also who they're with, where they're going. So let's say that an abusive partner is paranoid or worried that that the abused partner is cheating on them. And so they're going to say, okay, I'm going to get into their Uber account and see the address of everywhere that they're going and try to cross-check that address with who they might be with. Food delivery apps, same concept. It's exactly where somebody is and who they might be with. And every time that they've been there, over the last couple weeks, months. We've talked about maps and driving apps, parking apps. So I don't know if where you all are in West Virginia, this is something that you all are using yet. I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and we absolutely use these park mobile apps. It's really convenient. Instead of, when I'm out, instead of having to run back to a parking meter and feed more money into it, I can just access my parking from my phone wherever I am. So I can say, okay, I'm going to be downtown for the next 4 hours. So I'm just going to use this to pay for my parking. How great. But think about that for location tracking. Someone will say, okay, I know exactly where this person is. I know how long they're going to be there. And I know how long their car is going to be unattended. So much stalking and harassment occurs through people's vehicles because it can be difficult to get access to somebody's person, but it can be much simpler to get access to their vehicle when it's unattended. And when someone has access to their vehicle, they can plant location trackers. They can slash someone's tires, hurt the vehicle in some way that can be a really terrifying form of harassment. So a parking app, access to a parking app can facilitate all of that harm. We've talked about social media and all of the information, all of the location information that can be given through the data in the post, but also through the information in the image, the location, who someone's with, what they're doing. They're posting all of that for their friends and family to see. We talked about Find My Phone and different types of location tracking. And app connected vehicles. So someone mentioned this in the chat. I have an old car. My car is from 2013. So I have a dumb car. My car does not connect to the internet. For people who have newer cars, all newer cars are going to connect to the internet or to Bluetooth in some way. And that's incredibly convenient. But what that means is that suddenly a vehicle is accessible to someone else who might have malicious motivations. So with an app connected vehicle, most times there is an app that links up to a car. And so when somebody purchases a new car, they put their VIN number into the Ford app or to the GM app or to whatever brand car they've had. And it creates, it links them to this app where they can check the fuel on the car, or if it's an electric car, what's the charge on the car? They can remotely access the heating or the air conditioning. They can turn on and off the headlights, or they can lock and unlock the car. They can get all sorts of location data from that app. So very, very useful for somebody who wants to have all that for their car at their fingertips, but incredibly damaging in the context of relationship abuse or other types of abuse or stalking or location tracking. Now, one specific thing that it's important to know is that car manufacturers are focused on who is the owner of the vehicle, not who has possession of the vehicle. So one thing that one very serious problem that advocates have encountered is that, let's say that there is a married couple and they are sharing access to a car, but in a divorce or a separation, or if there's a restraining order, the survivor has been granted sole access or sole possession of that vehicle, but the abuser is still listed as the owner of the vehicle. Unfortunately, car companies are not going to respect that court order. They're going to respect the ownership of the car. And so we've seen circumstances where survivors are trying to use the car that they have legal possession over, but they're still being harassed by their abusive partner through the app. We've heard stories about survivors who they are driving down the highway and suddenly their abusive partner is locking and unlocking the doors, turning on and off the headlights, turning up and down the music just to terrify them, or is tracking their location through the app, or is trying to limit whether or not they can charge up their electric vehicle. All those things have been experiences of survivors. So this is something we absolutely need to know about. Now, one thing that can be really helpful is this website, vehicleprivacyreport.com. And this is where a person can learn as much information about their smart car as they can in order to safety plan. So, what someone can do is go to this website and put in the VIN number for their specific vehicle. And this is what they're going to get. They're going to be shown, first of all, is their car a smart car? Can it connect to the internet? And if so, what information is your car collecting? So for this specific vehicle, it's saying, okay, yes, your car has identity information about you, location information. It can be synced to your phone and it has a unique user profile. The only thing that this car doesn't have in terms of collecting data is biometric information. So some cars are going to be getting like fingerprints or having some other sort of biometric data in order to start the car. So this car doesn't have that, but all this other information is being collected and stored on the vehicle in some way or onto the app in some way. Also, a lot of times, smart cars are sharing or selling data to third parties. So they're selling it to insurance companies, for example. And so this is giving a profile of exactly what data is being shared and with who. And then it has at the bottom the apps and services that are available for this vehicle. This is important because the survivor might have a smart car that can connect to an app, but they might not know that there's an app available for their car. And so their abusive partner might have the app, and the survivor might not even know about it. So all of this is incredibly important information, very helpful. And this vehicle privacy report is free for anyone. You do not have to pay to get this information. Okay, those were the inside threats. Let's talk about the outside threats. So these would be devices and software from outside someone's phone or device that can be used to track their location. First, we've got to talk about personal trackers. And I'm sure that most, if not all of you, are familiar with these in some way, but let's just recap what they are. So in this picture, you can see a few different types of location trackers from different companies. You can see towards the bottom, the Apple AirTag, Amazon Tile, Samsung has one of these, Google has one of these. They're really small. Most of them are the size of a quarter or a keychain, and they can track someone's location no matter where they are in the world. So these devices work through Bluetooth. And what that means is that they're connected to a network. Now, my phone can connect to my speaker in my house through Bluetooth. And there is a specific, a location specific range for that Bluetooth connection. If I leave my house, my phone will lose access to that Bluetooth network. It'll drop. I can't, access my speaker from my phone from 2 blocks away. This is different. This is a long range Bluetooth network. Basically, what happens is that Apple's long range network, for example, every single Apple device in the world is creating a little signal that every other Apple device in the world can pick up on. And it basically creates this global network of Bluetooth signal. And that is how these location devices work. That is why, even though it's Bluetooth, this device can track a location anywhere that there's an Apple device nearby. So if somebody has one of these devices planted on them, and from the safety of their own home, a stalker is monitoring this person's location on their device, what will happen? If it is an Apple device and there is an Apple phone, then the victim will get a alert that pops up on their phone that says, hey, there is an AirTag near you that is not yours. It's not connected to your device. This isn't going to happen if somebody owns the AirTag. It's just going to be if an unidentified AirTag is on their person or nearby. They get a pop-up notice, and then they can go through and do a sound alert. And the sound isn't coming from their phone. The sound is coming from the AirTag itself, which can be really helpful to find it. So they can play that sound alert, and it's like, now the AirTag is beeping, and it's like, oh, it's in my purse, or oh, it's in my car. A few flaws here. One, this alert doesn't come up immediately. It takes about 3 hours for the alert to come up. There's a lot of danger there. So let's say that somebody is out at a bar and they're talking to someone, or somebody approaches them, and that person slips an AirTag into their purse and wants to follow them home. That entire interaction can happen in less than 3 hours. So that's one of the downsides. Also, this sound alert, it's not a fire alarm. It's not incredibly loud. And so even if the sound is playing, it can be difficult to find the device. So one way in which Android is different than Apple is that Android has a few specific features. One, with an Android device, you can scan for an Android tracker on demand. You don't have to wait for the app to pop up. And also with an Android, you can get really important information from that tracker. For example, you can get the ID number associated, which can help to collect evidence against the person and prove who owns that tracker. You may be thinking, okay, it sounds like an iPhone can find an AirTag and an Android phone can find a Google product. But what happens if a Google product is put on somebody who has an iPhone? That used to be a big problem. And it's incredibly limiting to be able to only recognize a device from the same company. So that's why, great news, there's an update here. Apple and Google have partnered to try and fix this exact problem. Now, users will receive notifications about unknown trackers from both companies. This is newer. And so this partnership, this option and ability is only available on newer, with a newer iOS update. So iOS 17.5 and newer. And it's only available for Android devices 6.0 and newer. So if somebody has an old iPhone, or if they have not updated for the most recent iOS update, then they might not have access to this feature. And so that's just something that you might want to tell them if they're looking for, if they're worried that there's going to be a tracker on their person or in their car. Samsung has a tracking device. Amazon has a tracking device. Other companies have committed to joining this partnership in the future, but it's still an ongoing developing thing. The most reliable way to find a tracker is not necessarily to rely on these alerts. It's just to do a physical search. Here's just some helpful strategies for conducting that search. One would be to search someone's car. The car is going to be one of the most common locations for hiding a location tracker. If somebody has access to the interior of a victim's car, some common places to hide a tracker would be in the dash, in the glove compartment, in all of those little nooks and crannies around the front of the car where something might be. Also, some location trackers actually plug into the car itself. So somebody should go through and look at every single port on their dashboard and just make sure that nothing's plugged into any of those ports that they don't recognize. Another common location for a tracker would be the pockets on the back of the driver's seat and the passenger seat, those like skinny pockets that nothing can fit in, so we don't use them. That's a very common place to slip one of these trackers, because when was the last time you like reached your hand into the bottom of that pocket and checked what was in it? Just no one pays attention to those pockets. So that's a common location and a place to check. If somebody has access to the outside of the vehicle, then some of the most common places to hide a tracker would be in the wheel well of the car. We almost never look there. Or tucked behind the license plate of the car. That's a very secure place to put a tracker so that it's not going to fall off on the highway, and a place where someone would almost never look. The trunk is also a common location. If somebody can get into a trunk and slip a location tracker under the carpet or under the rug in there or sort of up in the corner. This is a lot of places to look. A lot of auto body shops would do a search like this for somebody. If they wanted to just take a look and say, hey, I'm worried there's a tracker. I'm worried someone's monitoring my location from my car. Can you just take a look everywhere a tracker can be? A lot of times a professional will do that. Or police. The police will sometimes conduct that search, and they might have one of the wands that can be looking out for a device that's transmitting a signal. Other places to look for a tracking device would be in someone's bag, in their purse, in their school bag, in their shoes, any item that's going to follow them wherever they go throughout the day. And another common place would be children's items. Let's say that there's a couple and there's kids and there's shared custody of the kids, and the kids are going back and forth between the abusive partner and the survivor. The abusive partner might plant a tracker on the child in their toys, in their bag, in their clothing, so that when the child goes back to the survivor, the abuser can follow their location that way. A common question that people have is there an app for this? Is there a third-party app that can just scan for any type of location tracker and make this process easier? Yes, but these apps are not reliable. It would be the same way as using a drink testing strip that doesn't work very well. If somebody uses one of these apps to track or to try and find a location tracking device and it doesn't work, it can give them a false sense of security. And so there was actually a university that tried to do research into this and found some of these apps for finding location trackers. They found that in lab testing, they were only effective about 50% of the time. So that's why a physical search is always going to be better. So Christina says, my Android is constantly scanning for trackers. Yeah, so this is a feature that Android has that Apple doesn't necessarily have. Android can look for the trackers on demand, whereas Apple, it'll only pop up when it's when the Apple device finds it. Another thing that an abuser could use to track someone's location or harass them would be stalkerware. Stalkerware is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot, and people don't necessarily know exactly what's meant by stalkerware. Basically, what it does is it's software that can be uploaded onto someone's device, and it turns the device into a listening device, into it might transmit the video feed from that device. So basically, let's say that stalkerware got put on someone's phone. That would mean that the perpetrator, the abuser, could listen in on someone's phone calls remotely, could see their screen and exactly what's happening on their phone minute by minute in real time. They could access the camera on someone's phone and use that camera to watch them. Stalkerware can take a lot of different forms, but basically it's that turning someone's device, their desktop, their phone, into a remote surveillance device. There are some signs that stalkerware might be on a device. One thing would be the battery life. Stalkerware takes a tremendous amount of data up on the phone, and it uses a lot of energy. So if somebody notices that all of the sudden their battery is being drained very, very, very quickly, it might be a sign that there's something installed on their phone that they don't know about, and that might be stalkerware. So they just take a look at how quickly the battery life is running down, or data usage. If all of a sudden their phone, like the amount of data that their phone is using has tripled overnight, that might also be a sign that there's stalkerware on their phone. And then another thing is how warm the device is. Along with all of that energy that's being used, it will actually make the phone hotter. So if somebody's like, I don't understand why my phone just is warmer than it's supposed to be, it might be because the phone is running software that's increasing the temperature of the phone. Stalkerware is one of those things that's the higher level tech expertise type of attack. So this is an incredibly good resource. Stopstalkerware.org. It's the Coalition Against Stalkerware. And again, this is in the resource guide. This website has a lot of very, very helpful information about what stalkerware is, how to identify it on a device, and if it's found, what to do about it, and how to prevent it from being put on a device in the first place. So if this is a specific concern that a survivor has, then this can be a really helpful resource for safety planning. And let's talk about this. Let's talk about safety planning. Because these digital threats are unique, we need to have unique strategies for safety planning for somebody's tech life. And all of these things we've talked about so far, the unauthorized account access, location tracking. We're splitting this up into two different things. We need to protect someone's privacy and we need to protect their digital footprint. So let's start with privacy. I'm going to give you all a case study of someone's privacy being violated. So there was a woman that Adam was talking to, and she had gone through a very difficult breakup. And after a certain number of months, she decided that she was ready to start dating again. So she downloaded a dating app and she just wanted to see. She just wanted to see what it was going to be like. So she put a couple photos on the dating app. She only used her first name. She didn't put her job. She didn't put any information about the specific neighborhood she lived in. So she wanted to really limit the amount of information because she didn't feel safe giving all that information out to strangers. So she's talking to this guy. Let's call him Matt. She doesn't like Matt. So after a few minutes of chatting with him, she disconnects from him. And then a couple minutes later, she gets a text message to her phone that says, "Hey, this is Matt from Tinder. Did you think you could get rid of me that easily?" Okay, question for you. How did Matt find her? How did Matt get her phone number? Her photos. Okay, yes. So Raylene says searched her name. Now, this person only used her first name. So searching her name is not how he's going to get it. The photos. This is how he's doing it. Okay. So step one, he takes the photos from her profile and he does a reverse Google image search. And what happens is that he takes those photos, searches them, and her social media profile comes up, her LinkedIn profile, her Facebook profile, her Instagram, because those photos exist in all of those spaces too. And so now he has her name and where she lives. With that information, he then goes to a data broker site. There are a lot of these out there in the world. One of the most commonly used ones is called fastpeoplesearch.com. This is another one of those things that, like, I'm so sorry to have to be the person to tell you about these because this can be really scary. If you've never looked yourself up on one of these data broker sites, do it. When I looked myself up on Fast People Search, I found my full legal name, my current address, several past addresses, my phone number, some of my employment history, the names of people in my family, all this information for free online for anyone to find. And all they need is my name and my location. Yep. So Tia says, I found family members searching for myself alive and dead. Yeah. So again, there are helpful things that this can be really helpful for certain people. Legitimate reasons to try and track someone down. Let's say, hey, I want to connect with someone that I knew in high school. I want to find family members of mine that I've fallen out of touch with. Or let's say, okay, I've met this person online. I'm worried about them. I want to prove that they are a real person and that they are who they say they are. I need to find some information about them. So this can be helpful as well. But in a stalking situation or in an abusive situation, this can be a way that an abuser can find a tremendous amount of information about someone and when they should not have that information. Yeah, so people are doing it now, and yeah, it is scary. It's scary how much information is out there about us on the internet. Now, if somebody is really worried about another person finding this information about them through one of these data broker sites, there are options to remove ourselves proactively from these sites. So here at the bottom of the screen, you see fastpeoplesearch.com/removal. Someone can use that link to make themselves invisible on this site, to just remove all of their information from this site. But as I said, fastpeoplesearch.com, it's not the only one of these. So this is another resource that we're going to give you. I apologize for the salty language. This is the big A data broker opt-out list. And so this is someone, again, who's a cybersecurity professional. She created a running list of all of the different data broker sites that she has found on the internet and exactly how to opt out of those sites. Unfortunately, it's a long list and it's a lot of work to go through one by one and remove yourself. So she's organized these by priority. Which ones are the most common? Which ones are the ones that you should remove yourself from first? How much effort is going to go in? So some of these, you need to submit a driver's license that's anonymized in order to prove who you are. Some of them, you've actually got to call the company, and that's a time-consuming thing to do. Yeah, so it can be difficult, but it's a way that somebody can go through and remove themselves from the internet to try and protect their privacy. And again, on your resource guide. Here are some other strategies for just making any sort of profile on a dating app or a social media account. One would be make sure to use private photos. The reason why Matt was able to track down this woman is because these photos existed in multiple places across the internet. So when somebody makes a dating profile, they can take brand new photos that only exist on that dating app. And then if someone tries to do a reverse Google image search, nothing comes up. So private, unique photos for every social media account or every dating app account. Another thing would just be to use a fake name, to use initials, to use a middle name. You don't have to put your real name on any of this stuff. And then also just generalizing information wherever possible. So if I'm making a dating app profile, I'm not going to put Director of Training and Education at EndTab. I'll just put educator or teacher to make it so that no one's learning any information about me through my job. And another thing to do would be that somebody can opt out of Google search. They can just remove any personally identifying information from Google search altogether. That's an option. Now, there's some benefits to this. If they're worried about somebody tracking them down, making themselves unsearchable on Google can be a really powerful tool. But let's say that someone owns a small business, or let's say that they're a local politician, or for some reason they need to be searchable on Google. This is not a great option for them. So this is the same with all safety planning. It's just thinking about someone's unique circumstances and finding the best solutions that are going to work for them and just knowing what options are. If someone wants to make themselves unsearchable on Google, they can. Okay, let's revisit this scenario with just a little bit of a difference. Let's say this woman, she goes on, she makes her dating app profile, she uses unique photos, she uses a fake name, all the different things that we said. She does all of that. Matt still finds her and he still gets her phone number. How did he do that? He used AI. Hacker. Okay, yeah. So this might be a different thing. Um, this is called PIM eyes. PIM eyes is a facial search engine uh, reverse search. Okay, so black face search engine reverse image search. The way PIM eyes works is not identifying a specific image, it's identifying a specific face. This is facial recognition technology. So if you have an image of somebody online, you can put it into PIM eyes and it will search the internet not for that unique photo, but for any images of that person's face. It uses AI to do this, and it's more accurate the more photos you have of that person. So if you go on and take 3 photos of someone from their social media account, then it's going to show everywhere where that person exists on the internet. And it also, the AI adjusts for age. So it's going to show not just what their face looks like now, but what their face looked like when they were a kid. All the image of them on the internet. Yeah, so Raylene says, my Lord, this is so scary, especially if you have kids. Yeah, absolutely. This is scary. Now, PIM eyes can have some positive uses as well. So if we think about a sextortion scam or somebody worried about being scammed on the internet and they want to prove if someone's a real person or not, then they can take an image of that person and search for them online. So let's say that somebody is chatting with a stranger on the internet. And when they search this person on PIM eyes, it shows, okay, this is not, this is not Mark from St. Louis the way I thought it was. These are all images that have been pulled from a modeling catalog. Okay, now we've proved that that person's not who they say they are. So this can be a powerful tool for protection as well, but it can also be a really harmful tool for tracking someone down who doesn't want to be found. Yeah, so catfishing, absolutely. So again, these are all things that we should know about because they can be both shields and swords. They can be protective, but they can also cause harm. And we just need to know all of these uses so that we can safety plan and prepare. Good news with PIM eyes as well. We can opt out of it too. So see at the top of the screen, opt out as an option. This is what that opt out procedure, what opt out would look like here. So someone has to upload a clear photo of their face. They need to check this. PIM eyes can store this photo in order to use it to block that use. Now, the downside here is that this is a website that does require that somebody upload an anonymized scan of their passport or their driver's license. What I mean by anonymized is that the person can, block out their address, all of that extra information, the expiration date, all of that stuff. The only thing that needs to be shown on the ID is their name and their photo. They can take out all the other information. But somebody might feel really uncomfortable uploading their driver's license in any way. And so that's just a choice that they can make for themselves. So that's all about privacy. Those are all strategies that we can use to protect someone's privacy online. And the other thing would be their digital footprint. So what I mean by digital footprint is all of the different apps and accounts and devices that they have, basically the full picture of their digital life. We've talked about how many places someone exists on the internet, all those 80 apps, all those 90 accounts, all of their, everything that they do on Google and their email, everything we've talked about today. And that can be extremely overwhelming to say, okay, Somebody is following you, someone's in your accounts, someone has information about you that they shouldn't have, and it could be coming from anywhere. And especially if someone's in a moment of crisis, being overwhelmed by that amount of work that they're going to have to do, that can be traumatizing. So, what we've done to just help a little bit with this is we've created this safety planning tool for you all. And this is also included on your resource guide. This is the digital footprint accounts checklist. This is a systematic way that you can sit down with a survivor and you can go through their digital footprint and just go through piece by piece and try and see where their vulnerabilities are, where their risks are, where they can do more to protect themselves, and how they might be able to do that. So they can start with their social media. What is every social media account that they have? What is the password for each one of these accounts? How are they accessing it? Have they ever shared their password or let somebody else use the account? All of that information. So we go through social media, we go through their apps, we go through their maps and driving, we go through their music, we go through their home security. So any of the smart devices that they're using in their home. Who might have access to those smart devices? Does somebody still have access to the ring cam that they have on their door? Does somebody still have access to a video camera or a nanny cam? Does somebody still have access to their speakers? All of that. Then they're going to go through their financial accounts. So do they have a banking account app? Do they use Venmo? Do they use PayPal? What about their loans, their credit cards, their banking, their devices? All of this. And it is a tremendous amount of work to do, but at least this way, it can be organized and systemized so that somebody can look at it and it feels a bit more manageable. And then once they've gone through, once they've gotten that full picture of their digital life and they can see it right in front of them and they say, okay, this is what I need to do, then they go through those steps that we talked about. They can go through the accounts or the apps that they think are vulnerable, and they can do that process of checking the login information, checking for any devices that shouldn't be there. If they see an unrecognized device, screenshotting it, kicking that device out of the account, and then changing the password. Also, they can do some things to make their passwords more secure. When they're updating their passwords, there are a few different things they can do here. One would be making passwords that are harder to guess. We talked at the very beginning part of the training how access and opportunity are going to be the biggest risk factors. A lot of times, what we use for passwords are a pet's name, a birthday, our mother's maiden name, all of that stuff. Those also tend to be the things that we use for the security questions on an account. So let's say that like you've forgotten your password to your banking account and it asks you 3 security questions to make you prove who you are. What are those security questions? It's where I went to high school. It's what is my mother's maiden name? Where was the street where I grew up? A stranger isn't going to know that information, but an ex-partner is. So when you're making those questions, you can lie. You don't have to give real information. It just has to be something that you remember. So you can say none of your business. That can be the answer. And with a password, we want to make sure that the password is as complicated as possible so that no one would be able to guess it. So one great strategy that I tell people is instead of having a word be the password, come up with an entire sentence that you know, and then use the first letter from every word in the sentence, and that's the password. So you can remember it, but to anyone else, it's just a random combination of letters. So Raylene says, yep, I write out a random sentence that includes letter and number for my password. Yeah, absolutely. Something that you can remember, but no one else would ever guess. Another really great tool would be a password manager. There are a lot of different companies that make password managers, and they all cost different things and have different features and have different types of security. I will say that LastPass is one of the most common password managers. They actually had a data breach not that long ago, so LastPass might be one that someone would want to look into if they decided that's one they wanted. So some of them are cheaper, some of them are more expensive, but the benefit of a password manager is that what it will do Someone will link up all of their different apps and accounts to this one password manager, and it will be constantly changing all of the passwords on all of this person's different apps and accounts. It will create incredibly secure passwords that are impossible to guess. And it's just this constant rotation of security. So someone does not have to worry about doing that themselves. And all that person needs to remember is the one password to their password manager account. And the password manager is doing all the other work for them. Another thing would be two-factor authentication. So someone mentioned this earlier. Basically, what this is an added layer of security for all of someone's accounts. You might already be using this. So most people, for example, on their banking app, when they go in, they put in their password. And then what the banking app does is it says, I'm going to text you a code to your phone, or I'm going to send you a code by email. And then you have to take that code and put it in, and then we'll let you in the account. That's two-factor authentication. It's just a second challenge beyond just the password. A really great way to explain this to someone who's not familiar with two-factor authentication is the example of an ATM. When you're at an ATM, you put in your PIN number, but you also have to put in your card. It's having two different ways for you to prove who you are. So if you have someone's card, but you don't have their PIN number, you can't get into their account. Some apps, as I said, with a banking app, have two-factor authentication built in, but some apps don't. So there are third-party apps that you can use to add two-factor authentication to an account that doesn't have it built in. Google Authenticator is one of these apps. So for example, I have my Zoom account hooked up to two-factor authentication with Google Authenticator. Zoom doesn't have this built in. I have added it with this Google Authenticator two-factor authentication app. I know I'm using a lot of big words here. This is kind of where it gets like a little bit tech involved, but I promise you, these are very easy to use. And there's more than one. Google doesn't make all of them. So you can add two-factor authentication from a third-party app, and it's free. You can do it for free. That was a lot. If you're thinking, okay, Sloan just went through a lot of information and I didn't catch all of it, this is another resource that you're going to get in your resource guide. This is a digital safety planning guide. So it's got use a safe device, how to change passwords, TFA, removing trusted devices from a phone, logging out of devices, all of that information we talked about is all included in this guide. And we have it for you in English and Spanish. So you can just go and review all this information there. Okay, so we've gone through unauthorized account access. We've gone through location tracking. Now, in our last 30 minutes, we're going to zoom in on another really common form of digital violence, and that is image-based sexual abuse. Location tracking and unauthorized account access, that is the frontier of relationship violence. This is the frontier of sexual violence. More and more, people are living their sexual lives online. They are sexting, they are image sharing. That's their choice. That's their choice as adults. But this is where the potential for sexual abuse is. Using those images to violate someone's bodily autonomy and their dignity and their privacy. So we're going to talk about two different forms of image-based sexual abuse. This training, I do these trainings and they last 8 hours. There's so much information here. There are certain types of image-based sexual abuse that we just don't have time to go over today. For example, sextortion scams. Sextortion scams are an incredibly important issue and something that a huge number of people, especially young men and boys, are experiencing. And they involve using somebody's intimate images, their sexually explicit images, to blackmail them. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to deep dive into that today. I'm happy to come back and talk to you all more about this. In 30 minutes, we're just going to cover what we can about image-based sexual abuse. We're going to start off by talking about cyber flashing. This is when somebody sends an unsolicited nude image to another person without their consent. The colloquial term for this, and I apologize for my language, is sending a dick pic. This is a really serious form of harassment and one that tends to get minimized. It's so normalized, right? A lot of times people will say, okay, this guy sent me this image of his genitalia. I didn't like it. It was really gross. But hey, that's just life on the internet. And so it's normalized and it's minimized. But we don't know the unique experiences of everyone. For someone who's experienced different types of sexual trauma in their past, receiving an unsolicited nude image from a stranger, it can be terrifying. It can be humiliating. It can be traumatic. It can be re-traumatizing from a previous form of harm. And so we need to take this seriously as we would any type of sexual harassment or sexual abuse. Yeah, so Raylene says, I wouldn't mind a more in-depth training for this. It's been very enlightening and informational. I'm really glad you think that way. Thank you so much. And I appreciate your feedback on this. And yes, I would love to come back and do more. I could do a whole weekend training with you all. There's so much information to cover here. And yeah, also I'm going to put my contact information up on the screen at the end of this. If you have any specific questions or if there's anything else you want to talk about, I'm always available to send more resources or have a chat. Cyber flashing is incredibly common, and it's experienced more by younger people than by older people. So this is a really troubling statistic. And I've got the source of this at the bottom of the screen. Of girls ages 12 to 19, 75% of them have received an unsolicited sexually graphic image through social media, through a text message, airdropped onto their phone. They've received one of these images in some way. This is a gendered crime. The vast, vast, vast majority of people who send these images are men and boys, and overwhelmingly, the vast majority of people who receive them are women and girls. This is a great quote from Sophie Gallagher. She's a reporter for The Guardian, and she wrote a really wonderful article about her personal experience of being cyber flashed in a public space and a larger article about the impact of this type of violence. So Sophie Gallagher, she was on a bus in London, and all of a sudden she gets an alert on her phone that an image is coming through Bluetooth, and she opens it and it's a picture of somebody's genitals. That is already just a horrible thing to have happen in your day, to suddenly be flashed by a stranger. But there was an added layer of trauma here, an added layer of fear, which is this is a local Bluetooth connection. So she knows that the person who sent her this image is near her, physically near her, but she doesn't know who it is. So imagine that fear. And this is a really impactful quote from this article. Cyber flashing is not experienced as less harmful or less damaging behavior just because it happens digitally rather on the street. In some cases, it's reported to have felt even more violating because it doesn't just taint a particular place, it taints all digital life. And so this is where we go back to all the way at the beginning of this training today, why digital safety is so important. Because we carry our devices on us all the time. If we feel like at any point we can be sexually harassed or sexually abused through our device, suddenly it makes the entire world feel unsafe. Yeah. It's airdropping is something we're going to talk about how to prevent that. So, do we see similar behavior offline? Absolutely. Flashing is a crime that happens, but it's actually pretty rare because in the flashing in the physical world, someone's face and name and identity is going to be attached to that action. Cyber flashing, it's more common because of the anonymity. Somebody does not have to identify themselves in order to do this. There are no real-time consequences. People are almost never held accountable for this, even though it's a crime. Even though it's a form of sexual harassment, people, how would you even know who did it, much less how to hold them accountable? And then there's an empathy vacuum. What sparks empathy is seeing someone's reaction to our actions in real time. If we have to see the harm that we're inflicting, we're less likely to do it. And we're more likely to see the person we're harming as a human being that deserves our respect and our care. Digital violence separates the perpetrator from the victim. It makes it harder to empathize. And that's why cyberflashing is so much more common, because people aren't confronted with the impacts of their actions. So how do we prevent cyberflashing? A couple quick and easy things that everyone can do to make this harder. One, they can turn off Bluetooth sharing. So Sophie Gallagher, this photo was airdropped to her phone. A thing she could use to prevent that from happening in the future is to turn off airdrop, or to set settings so that only people who are in her contact list can send her things. Or there's this everyone for 10 minutes. So let's say that she's on a bus and she wants to make sure for the next 10 minutes, no one can send me anything. She can use that setting as well. So it's just the setting that's going to work for every individual. Another thing that is unique to Apple devices is sensitive content warning. So this is a feature that you can turn on your Apple device through settings. And with sensitive content warning, it's a form of AI that will scan in any incoming image from your contacts or from a strange number. And if it identifies an image as potentially sexually graphic, it will blur out the image and you have to click on it to choose to look at it. Great way to prevent cyberflashing. Also, sensitive content warning is linked up to resources for sexual violence. So if someone is cyberflashed, there's help right there embedded in this feature. And the other way that we can prevent cyberflashing is by talking about it, by educating young people about the impacts of this type of sexual violence so that they're less likely to commit it. We need to disrupt the normalization of it. We need to make sure that people understand it's not funny. It's not a joke. It's not something that we can just brush off. It's a form of sexual assault. It's a form of sexual harassment. And we need to teach people about it in that way. We need to talk about the potential for trauma here. We need to clarify why it's harmful, and we need to use this online example. That comparing online and offline behaviors is so important and helpful for so many types of online violence. But here specifically to say, if you would not pull out your genitals and show them to a stranger in the physical world, offline, you need to not do it online because it's the same thing. And this is a really great opportunity to talk about consent. When we talk about consent, we're usually talking about physical sexual encounters. We need to expand our consent conversations to talk about digital sexual encounters. We need to talk about consent when it comes to sexting, and we need to talk about consent when it comes to image sharing. If someone has not consented to receive an intimate image, then we should not send them that image. It is their right to decide what images they see and don't see. So it's a consent issue. The other form of image-based sexual abuse we're going to talk about is the non-consensual distribution of intimate images, or NDII. That's a really clunky term. The more familiar term for this is revenge porn. But we want to move away from using that term for a couple reasons. One, the word revenge. Sharing someone's intimate images on a porn site or on social media and calling it revenge, first of all, that's a victim blaming thing. It implies that the victim did something wrong and now they're being punished for it. And that's just not, first of all, that's not the situation a lot of times, but also, no, that puts the blame, with all victim blaming, that puts the blame on the person who's been targeted and not on the perpetrator who shared these images without consent. And the other part is porn. Pornography, however we feel about pornography, it is an industry. It's people's job. They choose to engage in it consensually. This is not porn. This is not someone's job. This is not a choice they made. This is a crime that happened to them. So that's why we don't use the term revenge porn. That's why we say non-consensual image sharing. Yeah, Christina says words matter. We need to validate the terms of victims of this abuse, and calling it revenge porn paints the wrong image of what they experienced. We need to call it non-consensual image sharing. Let's check back in about why this is so damaging. If we share someone's image offline, if it's just one person showing another person an image, that is damaging because that's a violation of somebody's bodily autonomy and their dignity. But sharing an image online amplifies the abuse in a huge way. And these are the same things we talked about at the beginning of the training, that sharing that image is repeatable. It's far reaching. That image can be anywhere on the internet and seen anywhere on the world. It's incredibly public. It's permanent, and it can happen over and over and over again. This is a really important thing to zoom in on here. Does it matter how the images were obtained? A lot of times when someone reports image-based sexual abuse or non-consensual image sharing, the first thing they have to answer is, did you take this photo yourself? And that automatically takes it to a victim blaming place. And a lot of times what people hear is, well, if you didn't want these images to end up on the internet, you shouldn't have taken them in the first place. Didn't you think this is what was going to happen? You should have known this was going to happen. That is incredibly re-traumatizing for someone who's already experiencing something very traumatic. So in terms of this question, does it matter how the images were obtained? In some ways, yes, because we want to know about the unique experience this person has had. Were these photos shared by a former partner? That's one form of trauma. Were they stolen off of their phone? That's another form of trauma. Were they created by AI, which we're going to talk about in a second? That's another form of trauma. So in that way, their unique experience, yes, that's important. But in another way, no. Because no matter how these images were created, no matter how they were obtained by the perpetrator, it's a crime. This person has been targeted by a crime. This is a crime in 48 states and DC. I think it's Maine and South Carolina where it isn't. So this is something that somebody can seek justice for. So what can we do about this? How can we prevent and respond to image-based sexual abuse? One, we need to navigate harm with survivors the same way that we would for any other type of sexual violence or gender-based violence. We need to believe survivors when they say that these images were shared. Instead of trying to pick apart their story, just trust what they're telling us. We need to validate how harmful this is. As we said earlier, and as I've been saying throughout the training, so often different types of online violence are minimized, and the experiences of people who have experienced this harm are erased. So we need to validate that what has happened to them is traumatic and it's terrifying and it can make them angry or disgusted or afraid. All of that harm we need to validate. We need to respond and not react. So, okay, Adrian, thank you so much. Adrian has just put a link to West Virginia's non-consensual image law. Every state is unique, and this is just a quick thing to touch on. There is no federal law against non-consensual image sharing. The SHIELD Act is working its way through Congress right now. So hopefully soon there will be a federal law. But right now it's all state laws, which can create a really uneven patchwork and make it difficult for survivors, especially when these images are shared across state lines. But thank you, Adrian, for giving this West Virginia specific information. Now, when it comes to respond, don't react. You all are in this training today, and hopefully you're learning a lot of things. When it comes to different types of tech facilitated violence, a lot of these types of tech are new. And so an advocate might be learning about this new type of violence in real time when a survivor is disclosing it. So that's why it's so important that we educate ourselves so that we're prepared to receive those disclosures. But also, if we're hearing about a new type of violence in real time, we need to focus on the experience of the survivor and not on our own experience of fear, hearing about something terrifying for the first time. And also avoiding victim blaming. You all are professionals. You all know the harms of victim blaming, and we need to make sure that we aren't victim blaming in this context the same way that we wouldn't be victim blaming for physical violence that someone had experienced. And here are a few things that we can do to respond to image-based abuse. One is to save the evidence. The same way that when someone has experienced a sexual assault, the first thing that they might want to do is to shower, to change their clothes, to clean themselves because they just want it to disappear. A lot of times when somebody sees these images online, they want to delete them. They want to get rid of them. But that can make it incredibly difficult for them to track down and find the image if they ever want to hold this perpetrator accountable. So saving the evidence can be really helpful. And if they don't want to save the evidence themselves, then they can have a friend or a family member or an advocate track down and save that evidence for them. And what that looks like is downloading videos, screenshotting web pages, saving URLs, tracking the date and time that they accessed that website or saw that image. All of that information can be really helpful. Another thing would be to remove the image from Google searches. So the same way that someone can remove their personal information from a Google search, they can make an image or a video unsearchable on Google. Now, that does not remove that image from the internet at large. It just makes it unsearchable on Google. But the vast majority of traffic to porn sites, to deepfake sites, all of that, it comes through Google search. So if the image isn't searchable, it makes it a lot less visible. And another thing would be a takedown request. So if an image is showing up on social media or onto a porn site, most of those platforms have a method in place for requesting a takedown. Now, all social media sites are not created equal. Some social media sites are responsive to these takedown requests. Some are not. Twitter is notoriously a problem here. Sometimes these websites, the procedures will be very clear. Sometimes they will be very confusing. This is just something that we need to prepare a victim for. If they decide to start doing takedown requests, we just need to tell them that yes, it might be difficult. Yes, it might be complicated. Yes, the image might not come down, but it's something that they can try to do. Taking down images from the internet can feel like this nonstop game of whack-a-mole because the perpetrator has the image, so they can repost it over and over and over again across different websites. And that, to constantly be searching the internet and have that constant fear of this image being out there, that's incredibly traumatizing. So here's a really wonderful resource. It's called stopncii.org or Stop Non-Consensual Image Sharing. What they will do, a survivor, if they have access to a specific image, and this works for an image or a video, they can upload it into stopncii.org. Now, StopNCII, they will not save the image. What they'll do is they'll create a digital fingerprint of the image and then delete the image itself. They'll then take that digital fingerprint and they'll send it around to all of their participating partner organizations. So that's Facebook, that's Instagram, that's Pornhub, and a bunch of other sites. And then they'll use AI to constantly scan all of those platforms for the image and then proactively delete it when it shows up. Really great way to just outsource the work of this to an organization. And this is entirely free. This is not a paid service. This is a nonprofit organization. Yeah, so Raylene, yes, you all are going to receive a resource guide that has all of this information I've been talking about today. Another great resource is NCMEC, so the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They have a program called Take It Down. This is specifically for CSAM, or child sexual assault material, child sexual abuse material. If somebody has images of themselves as a minor online, the NCMEC will help them track down those images and remove them from the internet. And this can be from somebody who's currently a minor, Or this can be from someone who's an adult, but there are images of themselves from when they were a minor. So this is really helpful as well. Okay, prevention strategies. One would be that we need to teach young people about how to sext in a safer way so that if their images are shared online, we can limit the harm of it. So a really great way is just to be careful about the image itself. A lot of times, when somebody has an image of themselves online, the potential for harm is rooted in the ability of somebody to identify them from the photo. So a way to limit that damage would be if someone's going to share intimate images, not having their face in the image or any other type of identifying information. So unique tattoos, birthmarks, piercing, anything that could prove that it's them. They can cover up intimate areas in the image with an emoji or a smudge tool. They can make it cheeky and sexy and fun, but it's protecting their body. And also making sure to use a neutral background so that their home, where they went to school, any information about them is not going to be present in the background of the photo as a way to identify them. And also, we can store images in a more safe way. So this will protect somebody from accessing an image on someone's phone and stealing it. One thing would be to use the hidden folder on a phone. So this is from Apple, and I apologize. This training is very Apple centric, so I apologize to all you Android users out there. But an iPhone has a hidden folder. So any image can be we're coming to the end of 2 hours. I'm I'm becoming a little less articulate. So somebody can go to a specific photo and choose to save it into their hidden album. The hidden album is password protected or biometrically protected. So if somebody has access to a phone or someone has access to someone's photos, they're not going to be able to see this album without the password. Another thing would be to download a photo vault app. And so this is the way that someone can save their photos into this app, and the app is password protected and encrypted. So it just makes the photos really secure. This is actually an app that exists on the Google Play Store. So this is for your Android users out there. Now, we're coming up on the end of our time. We've gone through a lot today. I do just want to quickly touch on deep fakes or AI generated images before we go. There are two types of these AI generated images, and the technology is constantly changing, but generally this is what it looks like. It's either a photo or a video. Now, to make a deep fake video or an AI generated pornographic video, what happens is someone will use an app to put one person's face onto a pre-existing video. So this is Emma Watson. Unfortunately, celebrities are very often targets for this type of abuse. Now, in this app, someone just takes their finger, circles the photo or circles the face of the person they want into the video. They choose the porn video that they want, and then they just drop the face onto the video, and suddenly they have a hyper realistic pornographic video of anyone that they want to make it of. It's basically creating sexual violence. It's violating someone's bodily autonomy. Another type of AI generated image abuse would be an undressing app. So this is an app where somebody will upload a full body photo of somebody, and the AI in the app does all the work of removing the clothing from that picture and making it look like a hyper realistic nude photo of somebody. This is incredibly common form of abuse. So this is just a few different articles from the past year about these apps being used to create sexually explicit images of people. It is a form of sexual abuse. It's basically creating violence, and overwhelmingly, this is a gendered crime. A lot of these undressing apps don't even work on a male body. They only work on female bodies. So this is a violence against women issue. What can be done about this? Unfortunately, there is no tech solution to this. And that's why this specific type of image-based sexual abuse is so terrifying, because we can't stop it from happening. It can happen to anytime, anywhere with one image of somebody. So we need to teach about this. We need to teach young people why this is so harmful. And we can do that by talking to them about bodily autonomy. Bodily autonomy is the concept that we as individuals have the right to control what does and does not happen to our bodies. We need to expand that definition to include images, replicas, and digital representations of our body, not just our physical body, but how our body exists online, how it exists in digital spaces. When we create an image of someone's body that shows them being sexually abused, that is digital rape. That's a violation of their bodily autonomy. And that's how we need to teach young people about it. And also, we need to teach about bystander intervention. So this is just I have a whole workshop that's like a 90-minute workshop just on online bystander intervention. I'd love to share it with you. I also have a training about healthy relationships online where we dive into consent and bodily autonomy and all of this stuff that we're talking about. But for those of you who've done prevention education, this type of the 4Ds, like all of these types of methods for teaching bystander intervention, we can adapt them for online harm. So this is my little thing, the 5 C's. When we see someone experiencing image-based sexual abuse or harassment on social media, we can teach young people how to be active bystanders in those digital spaces. We can teach them to check in with the victim or change the digital space to minimize the abuse. Call in support, ask other people for help, use resources like stopncii.org. We can teach young people how to collect evidence so that they can potentially hold harm doers accountable. And we can teach them methods for challenging the abuse in safe ways. So it's all about education, because a lot of times we can't necessarily rely on tech companies or the government to make laws to protect us from this. We need to teach young people how to protect themselves. Okay, so that was a lot of information in 2 hours, and I'm seeing a lot of comments coming up that this was very informative, this was very impactful, but also these types of abuse, it's scary, it's overwhelming. So I want you all to take some time today and just process this, take a break, walk outside. Hopefully this was helpful. And I need to hop off right now. I've got another thing right at 3 o'clock. I am happy to answer questions for you all. I know that this was a lot. So here is my email. Here is our website. If you want any information from us, if you want to contact me, if you want to set up a meeting to chat, I am here for you. So this is my email. Reach out anytime. Also, at EndTab, we have a newsletter. So if you just want to keep up to date with new types of tech and new information as it comes up, you can subscribe to our new newsletter, and that's just a great way to stay connected with us.